The Glorian Ascendancy did not arrive in a solar system. They made an entrance. Their fleet, a collection of 1,000 vessels so polished and gilded they seemed to bleed light, arranged itself in a perfect, aesthetically pleasing spiral formation around Earth's moon. Their flagship, the Majesty's Radiance, was a vessel so ornate, so overwrought with golden spires and glowing filigree that it looked less like a warship and more like a cathedral that had decided to take up piracy. At its helm was Grand Imperator, Valen the Triumphant, scourge of the outer systems, holder of the Sunstone, and a being who had never, in his 400 years of glorious conquest, encountered a species that did not immediately fall to its knees in terrified awe. The Ascendancy's protocol for first contact with a primitive, single-planet species was a meticulously crafted piece of theater. First, the breathtaking display of power. Second, a system-wide broadcast delivered in the target's own language, outlining the sheer, benevolent magnificence of the Glorian Ascendancy and the utter futility of resistance. Third, the demand for unconditional surrender and the swearing of eternal fealty to the Grand Imperator. It had worked on 1,000 worlds. It was, Valen believed, a flawless expression of galactic destiny. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, a chamber of cavernous ceilings and holographic star maps, clad in armor of shimmering obsidian and gold that was both completely impractical and breathtakingly expensive. "Initiate the proclamation of ascension," he commanded, his voice deep and resonant, a voice practiced for centuries to convey absolute, unshakable authority. On Earth, every screen on the planet simultaneously flickered to life. Televisions, phones, public billboards, and computer monitors all displayed the same image, the regal, imposing figure of Grand Imperator Valen, framed by the celestial glory of his fleet. A synthesized voice, perfectly mimicking the tones of a revered historical narrator, began to speak in every major language. "Hark, inhabitants of this world, designated Earth, gaze upon the heavens and behold your salvation. I am Grand Imperator Valen, and I bring you the gift of purpose. Your chaotic, meaningless existence is at an end. From this day forward, you shall find glory in servitude to the Glorian Ascendancy. You will surrender your world, your resources, and your unwavering loyalty to me, your new and eternal sovereign. You have one solar cycle to present your planet's designated leader to me in person to swear the oath of fealty. Refusal will be met with a demonstration of power so absolute, so devastating, that your species will be remembered only as a cautionary whisper in the cosmic winds. Rejoice, for your history truly begins today." The message ended. The screen held on the Imperator's stern, expectant face for a full 10 seconds before blinking out. Valen allowed himself a small, self-satisfied smile. The primitives were, surely at this very moment, overcome with a potent cocktail of terror and awe. Their leaders would be scrambling, their populace weeping. The ceremony of surrender would be a glorious one. At the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, the General Assembly Hall was in stunned silence. The leaders and ambassadors of every nation on Earth had watched the broadcast. They stared at the blank screens, then at each other. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief. Then, from the back of the hall, a single sound broke the tension. It was a snort, a choked-off, suppressed giggle. It was followed by a nervous chuckle from the French ambassador. Then the delegate from Brazil let out a full, hearty laugh. Within seconds, the entire hall, the most powerful and serious collection of human beings on the planet, was filled with a tidal wave of uncontrollable, rolling, gut-busting laughter. Ambassador Kenji Tanaka of Japan had tears streaming down his face, leaning on the podium for support. General Secretary Anya Sharma was covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking, trying and failing to maintain some semblance of decorum. "Ambassador, David Thorne of the United States, a man known for his stoic, unflappable demeanor, had gone completely red in the face, letting out a series of short, sharp barks that sounded like a seal in distress. The Sunstone! Tanaka wheezed between gasps. Did he say he's the holder of the Sunstone? And that armor, bellowed the Nigerian delegate. He looks like he's going to a fantasy convention, not conquering a planet. My friends, colleagues, order, Secretary Sharma tried to say, but she was interrupted by her own fit of laughter. It took nearly 20 minutes for the diplomatic corps of an entire planet to get a hold of itself. David Thorne, wiping a tear from his eye, was the first to regain his composure. He cleared his throat, a final chuckle escaping his lips. Well, he said, addressing the room, I think we can all agree on our initial unified response. He straightened his tie and looked at the communications officer. Open a channel to the lead, fancy ship. Let's talk to the holder of the Sunstone. On the bridge of the Majesty's Radiance, Grand Imperator Valen was frowning. His communications officer, a tall, slender Glorian named Lyra, approached him hesitantly. Grand Imperator, she said, her voice a little shaky. The primitives, they are hailing us. They have put forth a single representative to speak for their planet. Excellent, Valen boomed. Just as the prophecy of power dictates, they have seen our might and wisely chosen the path of compliance. Put him on the main view screen. Let us receive their inevitable plea for mercy. The screen shimmered, and the face of a human male appeared. He was older, with graying hair and a calm, composed face. He was dressed in a simple, dark blue suit. This was Ambassador Thorne. Greetings, Thorne began, his voice level. I am Ambassador David Thorne, speaking on behalf of a temporarily unified planet Earth. We received your, message. Valen puffed out his chest. Ambassador Thorne of Earth, you have made a wise decision. I am prepared to accept your unconditional surrender. Thorne paused, and for a split second the corner of his mouth twitched. Right about that, he said. We've had a brief discussion, and we've come to a consensus. I'm afraid we're going to have to decline your generous offer, but we do have a counter-proposal. Valen's magnificent eyebrows furrowed. A counter-proposal? This was not in the script. I do not entertain proposals from inferiors, he sneered. You will submit, or you will be extinguished. Hear me out, Thorne said, holding up a placating hand. We've been looking at your ship designs, and frankly, the aesthetics are quite something. Very dramatic. And your title, it's got a great ring to it. So here's our offer. We will grant your Ascendancy exclusive, planet-wide broadcasting rights for a new reality television series. We'll call it Galactic Overlords. You get to keep the outfits, make your speeches. We think it'll be a huge hit. The ratings would be astronomical. There was a profound silence on the Glorian bridge. Lyra stared at her console as if it might provide an answer. The other bridge officers looked at each other in utter bafflement. Grand Imperator Valen's face, a monument to glorious arrogance just moments before, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Reality? Television? He repeated, the words feeling alien and absurd in his mouth. That's right, Thorne said with a nod. Think of the merchandising opportunities. Little golden bobblehead dolls of you. Action figures with a special sunstone power grip. It's a gold mine. So what do you say? Valen stared, his mind utterly incapable of processing the situation. He had come expecting fear, awe, submission. He had come to conquer a planet, and they had just offered him a TV deal. His magnificent, terrifying entrance into the history of this primitive world had been met not with screams, but with a pitch meeting. The only thing he could muster in response was a single bewildered question. Are you mocking me? Ambassador Thorne's face broke into a wide, sincere smile. Oh, absolutely, he said cheerfully. 100%. We haven't laughed this hard since the great internet cat video craze of 2088. Welcome to Earth, you're going to be famous. The concept of mockery, on a planetary scale, was not something Grand Imperator Valen's strategic databases had prepared him for. He had cut the transmission with Ambassador Thorn in a state of sputtering rage, his carefully crafted aura of divine authority shattering like cheap glass. His bridge crew avoided his gaze, their own confusion mixing with a dawning fear of his temper. They laugh? Valen roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous bridge. They dare to find the Glorian ascendancy. Amusing? Imperator. Communications Officer Lyra ventured timidly. Our psychoanalysis of their response indicates a cultural defense mechanism rooted in something they call irony. It appears to be a form of passive-aggressive defiance. It is insanity, Valen bellowed, slamming his gauntleted fist on a console, which sparked pathetically. They do not comprehend our power. They have not felt the sting of true fear. Very well. They have requested a demonstration, and a demonstration they shall receive. Target the larger of this world's 2 moons. We will shatter it. Let them watch as a part of their sky is obliterated. Let us see if they laugh then. The plan was simple, brutal, and in Valen's mind, a guaranteed cure for the humans' misplaced sense of humor. The Majesty's Radiance reoriented its primary weapon, a massive energy cannon that glowed with the light of a captured star, toward Luna. The broadcast was re-established, this time showing a live feed of the moon, with the Glorian flagship moving into position like a vengeful god. Valen's voice once again boomed across the planet. You have mistaken benevolence for weakness and majesty for jest. You wished for a demonstration, and now you shall have it. Watch your sky, primitives. Watch as we erase your moon from existence. This is the price of insolence. The cannon fired. A beam of pure, white-hot energy, a mile in diameter, shot across the void and struck the lunar surface. The impact was silent but visually spectacular. A cloud of vaporized rock and dust erupted into space, and a spiderweb of incandescent cracks spread across the moon's face. A significant chunk of the celestial body was vaporized, sending a new ring of debris into orbit. It was a display of casual, overwhelming power. Valen folded his arms, a grim smile on his face. Now they would understand. On Earth, the reaction was not quite what he expected. In the first few minutes, there was indeed shock. Then, as people realized the moon was merely damaged and not destroyed, the shock gave way to something else entirely. Pity. On the global internet, the event immediately became known as the Glorian Pity Shot. Memes erupted across every social media platform. There were images of Valen with captions like, "Tries to be intimidating," "Scuffs a moon." Another popular one showed a cartoon cat pawing at a ball of yarn with the caption, "The Glorian Ascendancy dealing with a celestial body." Someone created a video setting the footage of the laser blast to ridiculously over-the-top opera music, which went viral within the hour. Talk shows and news programs brought on astrophysicists who patiently explained that while the display was powerful, destroying a moon was actually quite difficult, and the Glorians had only managed to give it a significant cratering. One analyst, a Dr. Elena Vance, became an overnight sensation for her calm, slightly condescending breakdown on a major news network. What we saw here, she explained, pointing at a holographic replay, was essentially a cosmic temper tantrum. It's like a child throwing a rock at a building. It made a loud noise, it left a mark, but the building is still standing. Frankly, for a civilization with their apparent level of technology, it's a little underwhelming. I was expecting a proper shattering, maybe a controlled deorbit. This was just messy. The global consensus was not terror. It was a collective, planet-wide eye roll. The aliens weren't scary. They were just dramatic. They were all style and no substance. The holder of the Sunstone had tried to scare them and had only managed to prove he was bad at aiming. Aboard the Majesty's Radiance, Lyra was trying to summarize the human reaction to an increasingly apoplectic Valen. She had learned to filter the raw data, as the unedited human internet feeds were likely to give the Imperator a catastrophic aneurysm. Grand Imperator, she reported, her voice trembling slightly. The humans, They are not expressing fear. Their analysis suggests they are disappointed in the demonstration's efficacy. They are referring to it as cosmically inefficient. Inefficient? Valen shrieked, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his golden armor. I carved a scar across their sky. I showed them the power to unmake worlds. They seem to believe you missed, sir, Lyra whispered. That was the final straw. Valen's rage reached a critical mass. His entire strategy was based on a ladder of escalation, posturing, threat, demonstration, destruction. The humans were refusing to climb the ladder with him. They were standing at the bottom, pointing up and laughing. Enough! He roared, his voice cracking with fury. Their mockery is a disease, and it must be purged with fire and steel. If they will not fear what we can do to their sky, they will fear what we can do to their soil. Prepare a ground assault. We will take one of their cities. We will plant the Glorian banner in its central square and broadcast the subjugation of its populace across the planet. We will force them to watch as we teach them the true meaning of conquest. He stabbed a finger at a holographic map of the Earth. His finger landed randomly on a spot in Europe. There, that city! We will make it an example! We will land the immortal 10th Legion and crush their pathetic resistance. Lyra zoomed in on the location. Geneva, Grand Imperator, she identified. It appears to be a major diplomatic and financial center. Minimal military presence. Perfect, Valen snarled, a cruel light in his eyes. A city of soft-bodied talkers. They will be the first to kneel, and when they do, the laughter will stop. I swear it on my sunstone. He was convinced that face-to-face, presented with the physical might of his elite soldiers, the humans' courage would crumble. Their ironic detachment would shatter when staring down the barrel of a plasma rifle. He was, once again, about to be proven spectacularly wrong. The descent of the immortal 10th Legion was a spectacle of calculated intimidation. Hundreds of dropships, designed to look like avenging silver angels, screamed through Earth's atmosphere, their undersides glowing with the heat of re-entry. They landed with thunderous booms in the parks and open squares of Geneva, their ramps lowering to disgorge legions of Glorian soldiers. And what soldiers they were. Each was clad in the same impractical but visually stunning obsidian and gold armor as their imperator. They wore helmets sculpted to resemble snarling beasts, carried plasma rifles that hummed with menacing energy, and marched in perfect, synchronized formations that had broken the spirit of countless worlds. Their leader, Centurion Kale, a 7-foot giant of a Glorian and a true believer in the Ascendancy's divine mandate, strode down the ramp of his command ship and took in the scene, expecting to see chaos, smoke, and fleeing primitives. Instead, he saw tourists. A large crowd had gathered, held back by a hastily erected police line. They weren't screaming or running. They were holding up their phones, filming. A man in a bright floral shirt was waving. A group of teenagers were trying to start a slow clap. A street vendor had pushed his hot dog cart as close as he could get and was doing a roaring trade. Centurion Kale stood frozen, his plasma rifle held at the ready. This was not the standard reaction. He had been trained to fight against desperate militias, to storm fortified positions, to quell riots. He had no protocol for being treated like a parade float. Forward. He boomed, trying to project the authority that was rapidly draining out of him. Secure the city square. Establish a perimeter. Show these primitives the meaning of glory and might. The legionnaires advanced, their heavy boots clanking on the pavement. They marched toward the city's central plaza, a beautiful square surrounded by historic buildings and outdoor cafes. The patrons of the cafes did not flee. They simply turned their chairs to get a better view. The murmur of the crowd was not one of fear, but of excited commentary. Oh, look at their helmets, darling. Terribly gaudy, but you have to admire the commitment. I wonder if the armor is heavy. He looks like he's sweating. 10 francs says the little one on the left trips over his own cape. Kyle and his soldiers reached the square and formed a defensive circle. They aimed their rifles at the surrounding buildings, at the crowds, at the sky. They were a perfect portrait of military power. And nobody cared. A news drone buzzed overhead, its camera broadcasting the scene live to the entire world. The news anchor's voice could be heard from the televisions in a nearby electronics store. And the Glorian troops have successfully occupied the Place du Bourg de Four, in what appears to be a largely uncontested invasion. The local populace seems to be treating the event with a celebratory, almost festival-like atmosphere. Jean-Pierre, what are you seeing on the ground? A reporter with a microphone popped up on the screen, standing just a few dozen feet from Cale's position. Well, Cheryl, the atmosphere here is electric. The invaders, or Glorians as they call themselves, have made quite an entrance. Their armor is certainly a choice, a sort of Gothic Baroque fusion that's already inspiring fashion blogs. The main question on everyone's mind here, however, is what exactly they plan to do next. Back to you. Centurion Cale felt a vain throb in his forehead. This was a nightmare. His elite, feared legion was being treated as a novelty. His soldiers were shifting uncomfortably, their menacing postures starting to wilt under the weight of thousands of curious, unimpressed eyes. Then, the situation escalated from absurd to completely surreal. A small child, no more than 6 years old, slipped under the police tape, clutching a dandelion. She toddled right up to the 7-foot-tall, heavily armed centurion, looked up at his snarling helmet, and held out the flower. "For you, Mr. Robot," she said with a sweet, innocent smile. Cale stared down at the small human and the insignificant yellow weed. He was a conqueror. He was the fist of the Grand Imperator. He had razed cities. He had broken armies. And he was being offered a flower by a creature that barely came up to his armored knee. He did not know what to do. His programming, his entire existence, had no response for this. He slowly, mechanically reached down and took the dandelion. The crowd erupted in a wave of awes and applause. The flash of 100 cameras went off simultaneously. The picture of the giant, scary alien soldier holding a tiny flower would become the defining image of the so-called Geneva occupation. The day wore on. The Glorian soldiers stood in the hot sun, their armor becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The humans did not resist. They did not fight. They engaged in a far more devastating form of warfare, relentless, cheerful hospitality. People offered the soldiers bottles of water. A local university's marching band assembled and began playing a series of popular show tunes, deliberately out of key. Street mimes appeared and began silently mocking the soldiers' rigid postures, to the delight of the onlookers. By late afternoon, the morale of the immortal 10th Legion was in complete collapse. They hadn't fired a shot. They had been met with nothing but kindness, curiosity, and gentle, soul-crushing ridicule. One young legionnaire was seen surreptitiously accepting a sandwich from an elderly woman. Another had taken his helmet off and was using it to fan himself, his face a mask of weary confusion. Centurion Cale stood in the middle of it all, the pathetic dandelion still clutched in his armored fist. He had come to instill fear and command respect. Instead, he felt like the lead performer in a circus he hadn't been told he was in. He looked at his demoralized troops, at the laughing, filming crowds, and at the mime who was now pretending to be trapped in an invisible box around him. He finally understood. The humans weren't fighting them on a physical battlefield. They were fighting them on a conceptual one, and the Glorian ascendancy, for all its might, had come completely and utterly unarmed. The failure of the ground invasion of Geneva was not a military defeat. It was a psychological unraveling. The live feed of the immortal 10th Legion being offered pastries and mocked by mimes was broadcast across the Glorian fleet. For the first time in centuries, the soldiers of the ascendancy felt not pride or fear, but a strange and corrosive emotion: embarrassment. Grand Imperator Valen watched from his command throne, his face a stony mask hiding a raging inferno of humiliation. He had tried spectacle. He had tried threats. He had tried force. Every tool in the extensive toolbox of galactic conquest had been blunted by the humans' incomprehensible refusal to take him seriously. His authority, which relied on an almost religious belief in his own terrifying importance, was eroding with every cheerful human smile and every derisive laugh. He knew he had one final card to play. It was a dark, ugly card, one reserved for the most defiant of worlds. He would make it personal. He would make it undeniable. He would force them to see his power by taking away the one person who embodied their mockery. "Recall the 10th Legion," Valen commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And bring me the one they call Ambassador Thorn. Bring him to me in chains. The galaxy will watch as I extinguish the voice of their laughter, and they will finally learn the art of silence." A Glorian strike team, moving with a swiftness and brutality they had failed to display in Geneva, teleported directly into the UN building and seized Ambassador Thorne. There was no resistance. Thorne seemed to be expecting them. He simply sighed, adjusted his tie, and allowed them to place him in energy cuffs. He was transported to the Majesty's Radiance, and then down to the now empty Central Square in Geneva. Valen had a stage constructed, a grand, imposing platform of black metal flanked by his most loyal Imperial guards. He would execute the human ambassador himself, with his ceremonial energy blade on a live, system-wide broadcast. There would be no humor in this. This would be raw, undeniable, and brutal. This would finally make them fear him. Thorne was forced to his knees in the center of the stage. He looked tired but unafraid. He gazed out at the empty cafes and the silent streets, a small, wry smile on his lips. Valen descended from his shuttle, every inch the vengeful emperor. He strode onto the stage, his golden cape billowing behind him. He stood over Thorne, drawing his gleaming energy blade, which hummed with deadly power. He addressed the broadcast drone hovering before him, his voice filled with venom and theatrical fury. "People of Earth, you have scorned our glory. You have mocked our power. You have laughed in the face of destiny. Now your laughter will turn to ash in your mouths. You will watch as your champion, this vessel of your insolence, is silenced forever. Let his fate be a lesson. The Glorian Ascendancy does not tolerate disrespect. We are the masters of this galaxy. We are—" He was cut short by a sound, a small chuckle. It came from the kneeling man at his feet. Ambassador Thorne was looking up at him, not with fear, but with an expression of genuine amusement. Valen's eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "You dare laugh even now? At the moment of your own demise?" "I'm sorry," Thorne said, his voice calm and clear, carried by the broadcast to every corner of his world. "It's just, I finally got a good look at your helmet up close." Valen stood frozen. "What about my helmet?" he snarled. "It is the Imperial Helm of Conquest, forged in the heart of a neutron star, a symbol of my—" "It looks like a duck," Thorne stated simply. "A very angry, very shiny, gilded space duck. The bill, the way the eyes are shaped, it's unmistakable." A profound planet-wide silence fell. Every human watching held their breath. They looked closely at the Grand Imperator's helmet. They saw the swept-back crest. They saw the two glowing red optic sensors. They saw the flared beak-like front piece. And a slow, dawning realization spread across billions of minds at once. He was right. It really, really did look like a duck. The silence was broken by a single giggle from a child watching in a crowded public square in Tokyo. It was captured by a news microphone. That giggle was the spark. It ignited a firestorm. A snort was heard in a pub in Dublin. A guffaw erupted from a family home in Nairobi. Then the laughter started in earnest. It was not the gentle, amused laughter from the first broadcast. This was a hysterical, uncontrollable, planet-shaking roar. It was the sound of 7 billion people all getting the same perfect joke at the exact same time. The wave of laughter was so immense, so universal, that it was picked up by the atmospheric microphones on the broadcast drone itself. It washed over the square in Geneva, a phantom chorus of pure, unadulterated mirth. Valen heard it. He heard a world united not in terror, but in absolute, debilitating ridicule. Even a few of his own Imperial guards, his most stoic and loyal protectors, could be seen trembling, their shoulders shaking as they fought a losing battle against the infectious absurdity of the moment. Valen stood paralyzed, his energy blade held aloft. He looked from Thorne's smiling face to the broadcast drone, and he could almost see the billions of laughing faces behind it. His entire performance, his ultimate act of terror, had been completely and irrevocably derailed by a single, simple observation. He was the Grand Imperator, the scourge of 1,000 worlds, and he had just been credibly accused of wearing a duck on his head. He couldn't do it. To kill Thorne now would not be an act of power. It would be a pathetic, childish tantrum. The execution had lost all its meaning. His authority, his mystique, his entire identity built on fear and pomposity had been slain, not by a weapon, but by a punchline. He slowly, weakly, lowered his blade. His shoulders slumped. The mighty Grand Imperator Valen the Triumphant had been defeated, and his conqueror was a single devastating joke. The withdrawal of the Glorian Ascendancy was as quiet and undignified as their arrival had been loud and majestic. There were no pronouncements, no final threats. The gilded ships simply gathered their demoralized soldiers and vanished into subspace, leaving behind a slightly damaged moon, a confused but unharmed populace in Geneva, and a planet still wiping away tears of laughter. The Great Duck Helmet Incident, as it came to be known, was now humanity's most cherished historical event. For the Glorian Ascendancy, the aftermath was catastrophic. An empire built on a foundation of fear and unquestionable authority cannot survive being laughed at. Rebellions, previously unthinkable, began to simmer on subjugated worlds who heard the story of the ridiculous-looking conquerors. Grand Imperator Valen went into a secluded retirement, abdicating his throne, unable to ever again command respect while the entire galaxy was snickering about his headwear. The Sunstone was quietly placed in a museum. A new Glorian government rose from the ashes of Valen's humiliation. It was a council, not an empire, led by reformists who understood that their entire galactic strategy needed a fundamental reassessment. Their first and most humbling act was to send a diplomatic mission back to the source of their existential crisis, Earth. The ship that arrived was not a gilded cathedral, but a simple, unadorned vessel of peace. The envoy who stepped out was not a warrior in snarling armor, but a scholar named Xylar, dressed in a simple gray robe. He was met not by a laughing crowd, but by a single man, Ambassador David Thorne. They met in a quiet garden in Geneva, not far from where the invasion had fizzled out. "Ambassador," Xylar began, his voice soft and academic. "I have come to understand. We have reviewed the records. We have analyzed every moment of our interaction, and we are still at a loss. Why were you not afraid?" Thorne gave a small, thoughtful smile and gestured to a nearby bench. "Please sit. It's a long story. It's our story. You see, Xylar, humanity has a very long and very painful history of dealing with people like Valen. We've had thousands of them on our own planet. Emperors, kings, tyrants, despots, men who dressed in ridiculous clothes, gave themselves absurd titles, and demanded that everyone fear them. They built monuments to themselves and declared their rule eternal." He paused, looking up at the sky. "And we did fear them for a time. But we learned something. We learned that their power, the kind of power built on fear and ceremony, is a fragile thing. It has a fatal weakness." "And what is that weakness?" Xylar asked, leaning forward, genuinely curious. "Ridicule," Thorne said simply. "Laughter. You can't command the respect of people who are busy laughing at you. A tyrant can survive a rebellion, but he can't survive becoming a joke. So, over centuries, we developed a cultural immune system. Satire, sarcasm, parody. These became our weapons against arrogance. When Grand Imperator Valen showed up, looking and talking like every self-important tyrant from our history books, our immune system just kicked in. We couldn't take him seriously because we've seen his act 1,000 times before. He wasn't new. He was a cliché." Xylar was silent for a long time, processing this. The Glorians had never encountered a species that had culturally vaccinated itself against authoritarianism. Their power was a virus, and humanity was immune. "So your laughter," Xylar said slowly, "it was not a sign of insanity. It was a defense, a weapon." "The best weapon we've ever developed," Thorne confirmed. "It doesn't require ammunition, and it leaves no casualties. It just deflates things. It reduces bullies to the ridiculous, insecure figures they truly are." From that day on, a new and bizarre relationship began to form. Humanity did not join the new Glorian Commonwealth, but they became its strangest, most unpredictable ally. They were the galactic community's official reality check. When a new species would rise, full of pomp and arrogance, the Glorians wouldn't send a warship. They'd send a human diplomat and a team of comedy writers. The story of humanity's first contact became a legend, a lesson taught in every academy across the galaxy. It was the story of how the greatest empire of the age was brought to its knees, not by fleets or armies, but by a unified, planet-wide sense of humor. Humanity never built a great star-faring empire of its own. It didn't need to. It had something far more powerful: They were the species that had looked into the face of galactic tyranny and couldn't stop laughing at its sheer, unmitigated arrogance. And no one, ever again, made the mistake of wearing a helmet that even vaguely resembled a duck.